Inside America's Boardrooms, the informational show for board members and corporate secretaries. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, R.R. Donnelly, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm T.K. Kerstetter, the CEO of Boardroom Resources, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the show. We're going to be looking at a couple topics today. We're going to talk a little bit about the restructuring of boards during a spinoff, but we want to devote a lot of our time to the issue of board diversity and some recent announcements that have been made. And joining me to talk about these topics, which happens to have a good link to both of those, is Susan Ness, who's a board member with Tegna. Now, welcome, Susan.
Thank you very much.
So Tegna, no one might recognize immediately. If I used Gannett, they would recognize that. So explain the spinoff, and you are the surviving company, but you moved the name. So explain that to our audience just so they understand that.
Certainly. We spun off our publishing operations after a 3-year transformational process where we worked very hard on determining the future. So we now, in the spinoff, had 2 extraordinarily good companies, and that was our goal. Unfortunately, we were not able to have overlapping directorates because of regulatory issues, but that gave us an opportunity to really pull together 2 fabulous boards. And on the board, we had, I believe we filled 9 seats, giving us an opportunity to think again ahead where we were going with the board, what skill sets we needed to have for that. But to your question, we gave the name Gannett to the publishing operations. The remainder company, which is now called Tegna, and if you take the name Gannett and you switch around the letters, you'll get there, is comprised of about 46 major market television stations together with very big digital properties, including Cars.com and Career Builder, among others.
So you moved, I remember you saying to me that you moved more people into the spinoff.
What we did was our non-executive chairman, Marge Magner, interviewed each of the board members. We wanted, again, to make 2 very good companies. So we moved several of our existing board to the new board, including the individual who is to become the chairman of the board, and the audit committee chairman, because we wanted to have that continuity with the newspapers. So ultimately there were 3 people who went over to the new board, and we backfilled for that on the Tegna board, and then added an additional 6 people to the new board, plus the CEO who now joined the board.
So it gave you the chance to look at skill sets, it gave you a chance to look at diversity. Tell me just real quickly, so
Sure.
It gave you a chance to do that.
Yeah, and the way we did it, basically, we hired an executive search firm. We tasked that firm with coming up with a wide swath of players with specific expertise on the one hand, but then really emphasizing great individuals, new thinking individuals, forward-looking, younger for the boards and the like, including digital natives, to make sure that we were really thinking where the market was headed and not where it's been. And then we suggested some names. Our board and the new board, indeed, both care very much about the First Amendment. We had long-standing values that were extremely important to us, service to the community and the like. So those were factored into the individuals that we both interviewed and selected. And then we had probably about 150 names to look at or think about. Some of them were generated by us. We narrowed it down, interviewed about 30 in a very intensive period of time. We usually had about 3 or 4 people from the board who were doing those interviews, including our non-executive chairman. And then ultimately, we had the boards.
Well, I want to make sure that we have time to talk about that experience. And I know you always make a joke that you made sure that they were 50% male.
On the existing company board, Tegna, 50% of the board is male. Yeah. Our chairman is a woman, our CEO is a woman, our CFO is a woman, and it's a fabulous board. And then the new board has 30% women as well as 30% minority representation.
So let's talk about diversity, because that's a big part of your passion, okay? Mm-hmm. You are the leader of the SAIS Global Conference for Women in the Boardroom. You were nice enough to invite me one year to come speak at that. It's a great session that brings all resources together and tries to continue the movement on in the education about diversity in the boardroom. So a lot of respect for that. You know, we played a role in trying to provide a movement of the needle in that direction as well. But recently we saw some publicity from Chairman White of the SEC. Just touch on that just a second of what it is, because this is pretty significant when the SEC is starting to have movement, and also sure. Congress as well.
We had been encouraging the chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission to think about revising the disclosure rules for proxy statements on diversity. Why? Because they haven't been effective. They've been in place now for a number of years, and we're still seeing boilerplate language, not very helpful for shareholders to understand what the composition of the board is. So there was a study done by the GAO, the General Accountability Office, for Congresswoman Maloney, which came back with very stark results, basically. If the pace continues as it is today, we may reach 30% female membership on boards by the year 2024. And that is just simply unacceptable. And even then, it's when all of the new board members would be women, which is not a realistic thing, since only about 1 out of every 3 board members is woman. So I think what has now happened, she has talked about introducing legislation to require the Securities and Exchange Commission to review its proxy statement requirements on board diversity, and that may very well have helped the Chairman White to say, okay, we're now going to take a hard look at this. We don't think it's working. So they are presumably going to be reviewing the proxy statement requirements to see whether a more detailed information should be provided by each of the companies. For example, in Canada, as well as in the United Kingdom, as well as in Australia, all 3 places where it is voluntary. There is no mandate for a certain level of female representation on the boards. They have much more robust disclosure requirements. Sometimes it's with targeting, because when something is targeted or measured, it gets done. But just simply, how many females do you have on the board? What percentage in senior management? So by Congresswoman Maloney talking about introducing potentially legislation, I think that has now prompted the SEC to take another look at it, and that's terrific. At the same time, we also see a lot more movement on the part of CEOs and board chairs who really care about this issue. And of course, the institutional investors have been fabulous in saying not only is it inappropriate just to have no women on a board, but also one and done is not going to be acceptable for very much longer. So that's getting folks to move ahead and think about
Yeah.
it on their own.
Well, when I take the temperature of nom-gov chairs, and if I've talked to, 15 in the last 3 months, 10 of those 15 have told me that their next director will be a woman. So I think the efforts, and it's really about changing the culture. So
It is.
we have about a minute left. Some of the countries have gone as far as quotas. Nobody thinks that that's really going to happen in the U.S. But look into sort of a crystal ball. What do you think is going to happen in the next 5 years, sort of around this space? Do you think this will take hold at all with the SEC chair and Congress, or give a prediction, if you will?
The more that the Securities and Exchange Commission raises the issue, NASDAQ has been terrific. It participated in my conference. The more it raises the issue as something that's part of best practices, I think we're starting to see a change taking place where companies are beginning to think about that more. The Committee for Economic Development, for example, has a project right now which is every other one should be a woman. If you can at least target that, we'll start to get those numbers up. And then the culture needs to change in terms of tenure. Not necessarily hard, fast rules on tenure, but simply that having greater turnover on the board is a good thing. And that, in turn, will help to increase the diversity, not just for women, but diversity in terms of race and ethnicity, diversity in terms of age, perspective, and the like. All very good, all beneficial to the shareholders.
Well, as the father of 2 very sharp daughters, I am very pro-diversity. And Susan, I want to thank you for taking the time and coming in and speaking with us about both issues. I appreciate that.
My pleasure.
And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week where we take a look at another critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for Inside America's Boardrooms. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, R.R. Donnelly, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.